Hi, this is Beth Martin again, and this is a continuation of learning about some of our local Wisconsin native bees. So once again, welcome to the new normal. I'm sorry that we can't all be together in person at the Burlington Garden Center, but we will be continuing to prep you for spring, probably in the way that this is being delivered to you via video. So, as you know, if you listen to the first video, I am a beekeeper of honeybees. My husband and I produce the Sassy Bee honey. And so you'll hear me mentioning honeybees, and so don't be surprised by that. But the important thing to understand is honeybees are not native bees to North America. And once again, you probably just heard my parrot sort of chirp behind me, and hopefully neither of the dogs will go off as we are going through this video. So first, let's discuss what makes a bee a bee. So what makes a bee a bee? No, stinging you is not the answer. So yes, bees and most bees have the ability to sting you, but most bees are gentle. Even honeybees are gentle. They don't actually want to sting you because if they do, honeybees will die. So bees have two pairs of wings, usually noticeably hairy on the body, including legs, and medium length antenna and normal eyes. Flies have one pair of wings, relatively hairless, large eyes that cover most of the head, short stubby antenna. And wasps, like bees, have two pairs of wings, are relatively hairless, long antenna, and may have notably long, thin waist, and may have bright yellow or orange coloration on the body, which is similar to honeybees and also some other bee varieties. Another question for you would be, are these all pollinators? And the answer is actually yes, they are all pollinators. Some of them are just built to be more effective pollinators than others. And the thing that makes bees excellent pollinators is the fact that they are hairy because they collect up the pollen on their body. And as they go from flower to flower, that pollen is collected and falls off and collected and falls off continuously so that they are really great pollinators. So why do honeybees get a bad rap? And this is one of my things as a beekeeper that kind of bothers me. When we draw bees, and you see the two drawings to the left, what do they most represent? The insect on the upper right or the lower right? And so I think it is definitely the lower right. Wasps are much brighter yellow striped than bees are. So when people get stung by bees, they're thinking of these images to the left and they'll say, I just got attacked by bees. When in reality, they're attacked by yellow jackets, especially if you ask them, were they stinging you multiple times? And if they were, then they were definitely wasps, because honeybees cannot do that. When they sting you, their bodies actually break in half, and their thorax stays with the stinger in your hand. And even after they die, their thorax can still be pumping venom into you. So that's the thing that makes them a little bit nasty and why their stings are sometimes worse than a yellow jacket. So I bet you were excited to learn about that. So now we're just going to briefly review honeybees. So they nest in human-constructed hives with thousands of social bees. And they are one of our best-known pollinators, but they are not native to North America and were brought over with early settlers. So Europeans wanted to produce honey here in North America, and so that's how the honeybee got here. So if you do encounter them out in the wild, which I'm sure you do. They're probably from a local beekeeper, but it is also possible that there are wild honeybee colonies that are living in tree hollows or something else similar to that. So we've already learned about the mason bee from the previous PowerPoint. We know that it nests in above ground cavities, hollow twigs, logs, beetle burrows, and man-made holes. So this photograph is a blue orchard mason bee so that you get an idea of the blue color of them. What we did not learn about in the previous video, though, was much about the leafcutter bees. And these bees are absolutely fascinating to me. So the top picture, I'm not sure if you have ever come across this in your yard, but these almost perfect circles cut into your leaves. And then in the middle photo, you see a bee carrying the leaf. And then in the last picture, you see it landing on a bee house. And the way a leafcutter bee separates its larva from the next one is by putting these leaves up. So it is a native bee, and it nests in pre-existing holes in wood created by other insects or a hollow in plant stems, but it will also make use out of mason bee homes. So I told you in the first video that you could learn from my mason bee mistakes. So I have been keeping mason bees for a long period of time, and recently had been neglecting them due to some other things going on in our lives. And so this is kind of what happens if you don't pay attention to your mason bee homes. So the first picture was just a bad idea. This was out by our orchard. This is on a wood post. At first it was on a metal pole. And what happened was every time we had a windy day, which as you know can be fairly often, it would shake all the tubes out of the mason bee house. And so what it ended up being is tubeless, which did absolutely no good. The tubes rotted and that home was made ineffective. That was my parrot getting mad. So the middle picture is what happens if the whole containers fall to the ground. Some of these can be salvaged, but most of the things need to be tossed. You can see where there is sort of a tan cap at the end of some of those tubes. Those are viable mason bee tubes. So I will end up at least having these back outside when it gets a little warmer out so that those can emerge. And then those will have to be cleaned up, the bad ones thrown out, and some of those tubes then replaced. And on this last picture, if you look up in the very top left of that picture, you'll see that there are 3 clay holes and that are filled in at the end of this bamboo, which again we learned was not the ideal nesting cavity for these. The one at the very top has like a pinhole in it, and the other 2 do not. So the one at the top has been parasiticized. So I know that one will have wasps in it that are feeding off the larva. The problem, again, with this one is that bamboo is permanently lodged in there. So I can't get that out other than like taking a skewer and poking it in there to clean it out, which, as you can imagine, isn't probably going to be very pleasant. So this house will eventually be, tossed out, but not until these other mason bees emerge. So this is a case of don't be like Beth. Don't do these things that I did, which is put a mason bee house out in the open, subject to the elements. Don't put it on a pole either. The wind sway will shake the tubes out. Don't totally ignore them for years on end, and don't make cleaning them out difficult. So in this case, I really agree with a lot of what Crown Bees has to say. And I will take a lot more care of my mason bees in the future. I will likely remove the tubes and store them in my refrigerator or in my garage, and then take out the cocoons and store them in my refrigerator. I will only attach the bee houses to buildings. I've learned that lesson really well. And I'm going to give them more protection from the elements. Even some of the bee houses I see on their website, don't have enough of an overhang on their roof. So I would extend out their roof line just to give a little more protection from the wind. And one thing that I think is a good idea is I'm going to use paper inserts for the mason bee tubes. So what the paper inserts are is you have the cardboard, and then you put the paper insert in. The female lays her larva in there, and then you aren't pulling out necessarily the whole tube when you go to get your cocoons. You pull just that paper out and unroll it, which is really easy to do. But then what that also means is your tube is clean to use again the following year. Just insert another paper in it. So it'll really break down on diseases, which is, I think, a really great thing to be able to do. So let's not stop here. Let's help the other bees in our Wisconsin bee population, which is 400, which means that's a minimum. We likely have more. Some of our bees are incredibly tiny. I'm going to talk about a few different types of bees here, and the thing to know is they are in a vast array of sizes, but some of them are incredibly microscopically small, which are pretty cool. So they live in a variety of places. We already know that mason bee and leafcutters live in tubes, but there are other bees that live in tubes as well that may end up coming to live in your mason bee house. So you shouldn't be surprised that some things will look different than the leafcutter or the mason bee. And we also have to be aware of ground bees and what to do to take care of them so that they're able to succeed and live through the winter. So probably one of the most well-known bees that we have here in Wisconsin are bumblebees. There are 20 different species of bumblebees in Wisconsin, and we know that those are the largest bees. Some part of them is hairy. They have either yellow or orange to them. They can be striped. This one has, like the black dot in where the wings attach to the body. So they can be up to an inch long. They can also be smaller than that. And their nests are constructed in pre-existing underground cavities, such as a former chipmunk or rabbit burrow. And they can also nest in hollow spaces within compost piles, hay bales, or something similar. And they are docile. So I'm highlighting on these pages where these bees in particular live in teal so that we can see a variety of ways that our Wisconsin bees overwinter. So here we have a small carpenter bees. So there are just a few species of these in Wisconsin, but they can be quite common. I know I do see these quite often, and they look similar to the mason bees. But they nest inside hollow twigs and plant stems, so very similar to a mason bee. To create their nests, the females often dig out the soft central pith to create a tunnel in an existing plant. So this is a case in point where, you need to be aware in the fall that you have bees that are maybe wintering over in some of your dead stems. So this is an excuse to be a little bit messy and allow your fall dead growth to remain through the winter months and to not be so quick to clean it up in the spring too. Give those bees a chance to emerge. This is a small sweat bee, which is kind of almost the classic looking bee, and it nests below ground. So again, something to know, this might excavate a hole in sand or in soft soil. So when you see holes in the ground, they aren't always, worms or a bad bug or a snake. There are a lot of ground bees that we have here in Wisconsin. Well, this might be my favorite bee group of all, green sweat bees. Look at these bees. They're just stunning looking. And I get very excited when I see them on my plants. So um, I've definitely seen them in my yard. They like a lot of shrubs with flowers. They're great pollinators. But they're just beautiful when you get a chance to see them. Um, the interesting thing about them is that they're called sweat bees because they're attracted to the salt found in human sweat. Now, I can't tell you I've ever had one land on me, but that's sort of an odd thing. So most of these bees nest underground, but some burrow in wood. So these, because there's a variety of them, there's more than one, they have different nesting habits. So I have seen these at my mason bee house in the past. So this is a dark stripe bee, and it nests below ground as well. So it is from a large group of bees. So they are mostly solitary, and these are also a gentle bee. All of these have been gentle bees. So mining bees, these nest below ground and get their name from tunneling into the ground to create their nests. These bees can often be spotted in areas with sandy soil, which is easier to dig into and nest in. These ground nests resemble ant hills in appearance. Although many nests may be located in the same patch of soil, female mining bees nest separately. So all of these bees so far have been generalists, and some of them can be specialists as well, but they're all gentle and non-aggressive, one of your earliest bees of spring. This is your longhorned bee. They get their name from the very long antenna possessed by the males. So they are solitary ground nesters and tend to be docile. Um, this is a late summer and fall bee. So we know our mason bees go away in late spring, early summer. So when we aren't seeing mason bees anymore, this is the bee that steps in to pollinate those later blooming flowers. This is a squash bee. Females nest individually in the ground by digging tunnels roughly 12 to 18 inches into the soil. So that's quite a ways down. The nests are typically located near the squash and pumpkin fields where their food plants are nearby for them to eat. I also love about this bee that the males are often found sleeping inside closed squash flowers during the day. And that the female stocks her nest in the ground with food for her young, and that'll be important for a bee coming up. This is the cellophane bee. This is a bee that tunnels into the soil also to create the nests and line their nests with a glue-like substance, which creates a thin cellophane-like membrane. They're specialists and only visit certain types of flowers. And this again is one that isn't active until late summer and fall. So this is a masked bee, and if you can look at the picture there, you'll see a lot of white patches on the black part of their bodies. So it's very unique looking and not like any other bees that I really recall knowing. So one thing that makes this bee unique is of all the female native bees we've been talking about, they all carry pollen in specialized patch of hair on their body. Or honeybees put it on their legs. Some bumblebees put it on their legs in pollen baskets. But masked bees, they ingest the pollen that they collect. So that makes them very different. And then in the teal portion of this, they have weak mandibles, the poor creatures, so they're unable to excavate their own nests. As a result, these bees nest in pre-existing tunnels, often in wood, hollow plant stems, the ground, or even in natural holes in rocks. So I don't know that I've seen one of these around my mason bee homes, but they certainly could take advantage of it as well. This is the Carter bees, which is really a beautiful looking bee. And it gets its name because the female shaves off hair-like material from plant leaves, which they use to line their nests. So that's kind of interesting. They nest in pre-existing tunnels, which may include hollow plant stems and insect tunnels in wood. So again, could be something that would possibly nest in a mason bee home. And this is the only bee that has any sort of aggression to it of all the ones that I've read about. The males are larger than the females and can be territorial, but they're completely harmless. So now we have the cuckoo bees, which there are some of these that are very rare, and I think there's one that was even thought to be extinct that they've recently seen lately. But this is a very diverse group of bees, and they're sneaky invaders of other bees' nests. So when I was talking about the bee earlier that stores food down in the tunnels for its larva that it deposits down in the tunnels, this is a bee that exploits that. So this bee will does not make its own nest. It goes into other bees' nests and lays its larva and allows its eggs to hatch, and it will feed off the food supply by the host bee species. So, we see those behaviors in certain birds, and so it does happen in the bee population as well. And then I thought this was interesting. This is the rusty-patched bumblebee, and I got this off the DNR website. So this is a federally endangered and state special concern. It's extremely rare in Wisconsin. It is considered to be both state and globally imperiled. It nests in non-compacted and sandy soils or woodland. And the most recent observations were made mostly from the southern half of the state. So this could be a bee that you come across. I don't think this is the greatest picture, but it was what was on the DNR site. So if you see something like this, and you have your cell phone handy, snap a picture of it. This is a rare bee to be looking out for. This is another bee off the DNR site, which looks similar to the one I just showed you, and it's a yellow-banded bumblebee. So it is another ground nesting bee that often uses abandoned rodent burrows as nests, but it is a federal species of concern and a state special concern species, and it's found in wooded and wetland areas. So it has been seen more often in the central and northern half of this state, but also something else to keep your eye out for. So we are coming to the end of the second video, but I wanted to show you that we have these products at Burlington Garden Center right now. These are from Crown Bee, and so in the upper left, these are some mason bee homes, and you can see in the left of that photo, the tubes in it there are some that are larger, and then there are some that are smaller in diameter. So the larger ones would be for your mason bees. The smaller ones are for your leafcutter bees. We also have their Mason Bee Revolution book at the Garden Center, as well as one of their chalets. So you would put possibly some of these the white round pieces into the chalet if you would want to. And then that attic space is what they're talking about when you put your mason bees out in spring. You would put them up in the back of that attic space for them to emerge for the spring pollinating season. And for those of you who wanted to learn about plants that are good for the pollinators, which would be beyond bees, it would also be butterflies and moths and birds. That talk was going to be tomorrow as well, but we've put that off for a while. But if you want to start studying for it, you can study for it by studying your 2020 Burlington Garden Center t-shirt. So a lot of some of the plants we'll be talking about are on there, as well as some of the pollinators. And lastly, these are the sources that I was using for this presentation. So you can go to any of these websites if you wanted to read more about the bees. So they are all specific to Wisconsin, and are helpful guides. The last one is one you would use if you saw an insect and you really weren't sure if it was a bee or a wasp or a fly, and it would cue you to go through it would query you on some questions, and then it might be able to tell you what specifically you had seen. But keep in mind, there are at least 400 bee species, and I have no idea how many fly and wasps. So the chances of you ever specifically identifying some things that we find in our yard is kind of tough. And on that note, thank you for listening to these two videos. And again, stay safe in our new normal. And remember that one of the best things we all can do is stay in touch with nature and to get outside and to get our hands into soil. Soil is really some great healthy stuff. So I hope we're all able to get together soon and enjoy planting and enjoy the greenhouse together. Take care and stay healthy.